Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. All right, move it up a little. So I would ask you to take your seats if you can, and silence your cell phones, please. So I'm Mark Gamba. I'm a state representative, House District 41, which is in the Portland portion, Sellwood, Eastmoreland, Westmoreland. I serve as the Vice Chair of Housing and Homelessness in the legislature, and I am also the former mayor of Milwaukee, which if you'll grant me a quick brag, we just broke ground yesterday morning on 500 new units of affordable housing, a project that I started literally 10 years ago. I'm also the newest member of the Shelter Portland's Leadership Council, which I'm very proud of. Every one of our speakers tonight are part of Shelter Portland, a nonprofit with the mission of ending unsheltered homelessness in Portland. This evening we have two panels and presentations from some amazing people with extraordinary accomplishments. We're going to learn from communities that neither use sweeps nor jail, yet have ended unsheltered homelessness. I'll introduce both panels right from the start. The first panel will be addressing the subject of ending unsheltered homelessness, communities that have accomplished it. That panel will include Mark Johnston. Mark started working on homelessness in the 1980s, coincidentally, about the time that the federal government stopped building housing. Just as that issue emerged nationally. At that time, there were no federal programs or policies on homelessness. During his 30-plus year tenure in the federal government, he helped create the housing programs and policies we have today to confront homelessness. He served under 5 presidents in various roles, including the Deputy Director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, and was appointed as the Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development over homelessness by President Obama. Following government service, he worked directly with various cities and counties in helping them end chronic and veteran family homelessness. Next on the panel, we have Dave Beater. Dave served as the mayor of Boise from 2004 to 2020. And he played a crucial role in ending homelessness following the Martin v. Boise case, which prohibited criminalizing sleeping outside without adequate shelter. Mayor Beater established a network of emergency shelters, ensuring no one in Boise had to sleep outside. His efforts significantly reduced unsheltered homelessness in the city, with Boise now having 115 unsheltered individuals, compared to Portland's 5,398, clearly highlighting the success of his approach. Next on that same panel, we have Dan Steffi. Dan has had a long and distinguished career helping people by bringing more affordable housing options to cities across the West. As an assistant to Portland's late Mayor Bud Clark, he was charged with implementing the mayor's nationally lauded 12-point plan for homelessness. In less than 12 months, Dan and his team set up an emergency shelter system to accommodate all those in need and ended most unsheltered homelessness in Portland. And rounding out that panel, we have Julia Orlando. Julia is the director of Bergen County Housing, Health, and Human Services Center in New Jersey. Utilizing the Built for Zero program developed by Community Solutions, she led Bergen County to become the first community in the nation to end both chronic homelessness and veteran homelessness using this method. Before this achievement, she ended unsheltered homelessness first. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Her leadership and innovative approach have set a national example for effectively addressing homelessness at the local level. So that's the first panel. The second panel, which will be speaking to nighttime emergency shelter and day shelter operators and experiences. This panel will include Chris Iosa. Chris is the former executive director and founder of Do Good Multnomah. He's been a pivotal figure in the emergency shelter services. In 2015, he established a nighttime emergency shelter, demonstrating his commitment to addressing homelessness. His leadership was further highlighted at the beginning of the COVID pandemic when he set up an emergency shelter at the Charles Jordan Community Center in just 72 hours, showcasing his ability to respond swiftly in a time of crisis. Also on that panel, we'll have Andy Goebel. Andy is the CEO of Sunstone Way, formerly All Good Northwest. He has a deep commitment to housing and homelessness services. Before his current role, Andy served as the CEO and Director of Emergency Management for Do Good Multnomah, where he provided program design, leadership, and oversight for sheltering services in congregate, motel, and village model settings. Earlier in his career, he also helped found Portsmouth Union Church, a progressive and inclusive congregation that has hosted winter shelters for people experiencing homelessness and is currently building 20 units of affordable housing on their property to house that same population. That panel will also be joined by Matt Huff. Matt is the pastor of Central Church of Nazarene in Southeast Portland. In partnership with Union Gospel Mission, Matt and the church opened a nighttime winter shelter and is now working with Shelter Portland to open more. In addition to providing life-saving nighttime shelter, the Church of the Nazarene also opened Agape Village on unused church property, a transitional shelter consisting of 15 sleeping pods meant to help stabilize and eventually transition vulnerable populations into more permanent housing. That work has since grown to include outreach services, transitional programming, and retention work, all in an effort to break the cycle of poverty and homelessness. And the last member of that panel is Christine Delahanty, and she's the founder and executive, I want to start that over. I think I mispronounced her name. Christy Delahanty is the founder and executive director of PDX Saints Love, where she established a day shelter in partnership with Shelter Portland within 90 days to provide essential services to Portland's homeless and vulnerable populations in the Montevilla neighborhood. Her work includes housing navigation, addiction and behavioral health referrals, food distribution, workforce development, and community support, significantly impacting the lives of those in need. Her swift and compassionate leadership continues to inspire and mobilize community efforts to support the city's most vulnerable residents. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce my friend, and ideally the next mayor of Portland, Keith Wilson. Keith was born and raised in North Portland, one of 5 children. After a career in television, he returned to take the helm of the small freight company his father had founded. Under his leadership, he transformed and grew the business into the greenest, safest freight company in the region and one of the most innovative in the nation. As a civic leader, he has spearheaded the creation of Multnomah County Homeless Court Program. He is the vice chair of Word is Bond, which mentors Portland's future. Keith has also advanced bipartisan environmental legislation with the state through Breathe Easy Oregon. In 2023, he embarked on his biggest project yet, founding Shelter Portland. Going off script a little bit, sorry Keith, I was one of many people who encouraged Keith to run for mayor. In my view, he has all the attributes of a great mayor: compassion, practicality, backbone, vision, curiosity, and the innate ability to lead. It's high time that Portland have a great mayor again, and I, for one, believe Keith is that mayor. After the two panels, we'll have an audience question and answer session. We ask that questions from candidates and elected officials be held until tomorrow, when we will hold a meet and greet at our day shelter with the panelists to answer their questions. And now, our host, Keith Wilson.
When Mark explained all those things that I do, my wife was just sitting there right there saying, yeah, but he never sleeps either, right? Hey, I want to start out by just saying thank you all for coming. The subject matter that we're talking about today and tonight is extremely important to Portland's future. And it's important that we really try our hardest to get it right, but knowing that we won't get it right, but knowing we have the intellect to take what we learn, we take what we've done right, and then we improve upon it, and then we continue to move forward. Before I move forward, I want to just thank this incredible leadership council and board who are going to share this stage with me today. We have 8 of, I would say, our nation's top experts. And you heard Mark explain those bios. Really extraordinary individuals. And many of them traveled, great distances to be here with us tonight because they care about Portland. They care about us, and they're willing to share that insight to us. And so I'm very proud to have them here. I also want to talk about all the Shelter Portland members that haven't been able to arrive. There was one of them who lives in Brisbane, Australia. We really tried to get him here, but he said, hey, can't do it, mate, sorry. But then I want to talk about Shelter Now. So that was the predecessor to Shelter Portland. Shelter Now was a group of 10 of us, business leaders, elected officials, nonprofit, homeless souls. And we've been at this for 3-4 years, meeting regularly, setting up shelters, sleeping in shelters, learning together. And that really allowed us to do a spinoff, become Shelter Portland, because then we knew we had to operationalize these ideas. We didn't just want to advocate. It was time to actually put those models into practice and see what will and won't work with Portland. So I want to thank that very important group who helped us reach this point right now. So I'm going to frame the issues that we're facing in Portland right now, and while we're here to talk, and what we're going to do to really turn the corner as far as Portland's near-term future. As Mark said, my name is Keith Wilson, and I'm running for mayor to deliver real change to Portland. We cannot accept the status quo anymore. Portland has become a national symbol of failed policies, and it's time for us to recognize that and focus on real change. We cannot continue to do the same things we've been doing and expect a different outcome. A few years ago, I saw that my business was growing, but my city wasn't. We had normalized a humanitarian crisis. We reached to the point, driving down the street, riding my bike, walking, I didn't recognize my city anymore. And about 6 years ago, I really started to learn the why. And I want to ask each and every one of you, is this the city you grew up in? Or is this the city you chose to move to? It's changed so much, but it's something that we can reconcile and recognize the past, focus on today, and move to a new future. The other day while I was bicycling by a hospital, I saw 2 security guards wheeling a naked man across the street over to a park. They stood him up, they turned, and they went back to the hospital. He collapsed. I can only imagine what those 2 security guards must have been feeling. I hated watching it. I can't imagine what they felt doing it. I went up to the man, and his name was Doug. He needed help. He was hurting. Nobody was there in his greatest time of need. Our city had abandoned people like Doug to our emergency rooms or to our jails. I found him a shelter bed, thanks in part to my incredible board. I just started calling, and we had beds. Every single one of the board had a solution for him. I picked him up and I put him into a ride share, and Doug was cared for that night, at least that night. But these are not nameless, faceless individuals throughout Portland. There are 5,000 people like Doug living on the streets in Portland tonight. And the unfortunate part about that is that it's likely that 400 of them will die this year. And so I explained to all of you that this is not normal in America. We know that, and a lot of the speakers here know that. And as your mayor, it's a promise I'm making to you that I'm going to work as hard as I can to ensure it's no longer going to be normal in Portland, that enough is enough. And I've invited those speakers here today to impart and give you experiences in other jurisdictions that have ended unsheltered homelessness. We need to not dream, but we need to listen and learn. We have a bold plan. We have a bold plan, and it's ready to go. In the first year of my administration, we are going to end unsheltered homelessness. And I want to be clear as to what I'm talking about. Unsheltered homelessness is not homelessness. It's that first part. It's those individuals that are suffering on our streets, in our corridors, in tents or RVs or boats that we see throughout our community. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to reduce the burden on our overloaded public safety system that often is impacted because of that. And then we're going to revitalize our communities. So why do we have to end unsheltered homelessness first? Because everything else hinges on this critical first priority. Mark had noted that Boise has 115 unsheltered on their streets tonight, and Boston has 119. In Philadelphia, they have 788 people unsheltered tonight in a city that's twice the size of Portland. In Portland, 5,398. What do they know that we don't? To find out, I founded Shelter Portland, and I invited these incredible individuals that are here tonight to join our leadership council. We found that most communities rely on a network of nighttime emergency shelters to care for their communities in need. They flex up and they flex down based on that need. I want to be clear, they do not replace our current system. They simply augment them. But they have an immediate and direct impact on the out-of-control spending and the unsolved humanitarian crisis. We found that in 1990s, Portland relied on a network of publicly and privately operated nighttime shelters. And they had ended unsheltered homelessness then. We were nationally lauded for this approach. We had one of the lowest unsheltered homeless rates in the nation. And until 2017, we used to have a network of nighttime emergency shelters, but the city and the county converted them or defunded them. For example, the city closed the Salvation Army Female Emergency Shelter at 2nd and Ankeny, only a few blocks from where we're at right now. This shelter that you're looking at has 126 empty beds tonight, and it's been empty for 5 years. This in the middle of a city council declared homelessness emergency. What's more, this included beds for domestic violence victims. Prior to 2017, the city was responsible for managing our shelter system. And this is what our graph looked like. It was a flat line, if you've noticed, the unsheltered rate as well as the sheltered rate. In the previous years to 2017, Portland had added shelters, and the unsheltered homeless rate was declining. However, after 2017, the inception of the Joint Office of Homeless Services, the number of those sheltered began to decline. We are now sheltering fewer people than we did a decade ago. And the result, unsheltered homelessness in Portland has skyrocketed, increasing 136% since Joint Office of Homeless Services took over our shelter operations. Last year alone, unsheltered homelessness grew by 887 people. The results of this change is Portland now has the highest unsheltered homeless rate in the nation, except for a few cities in California. Now, it's okay to make mistakes. It happens. It's not okay to fail to learn from your mistakes, and our city has failed us all. But we can fix this. What we need to do is rapidly set up a network of nighttime emergency shelter in existing facilities like community centers and churches. Do you know how much our city spends currently on unsheltered homelessness per year? I see some heads shaking. Thank you for that. $300 million a year. What do you think my plan would cost to end unsheltered homelessness repurposing assets at night? It's less than $25 million a year. So to repeat, for less than a tenth of what we're currently spending, we can care for our community members. That said, nighttime emergency shelters are not enough on their own. While we recognize that many of our unsheltered are the working poor, they might be serving your coffee or making your sandwich tomorrow. We also recognize that many are not and need help connecting with services. That's where day shelters come in. Day shelters are a warm handoff used to assess a person's individual needs, where we offer mental health and addiction services and referral, where we focus on job training, classes in financial literacy, and housing navigation. And if someone wants to go home, even if that home isn't in Portland, we'll help reunite them with their loved ones. 35% of those in Portland are homeless upon arrival. When you end unsheltered homelessness, a lot of these souls are going to need help getting back home. This takes the pressure off of our treatment and public safety departments. We at Shelter Portland, in partnership with PDX Saints Love, opened a day shelter 8 months ago. We successfully transitioned people from sleeping on the streets to shelter and now full-time employment. I hope you can see my vision. With a network of nighttime and day shelters rapidly set up throughout Portland, no one will be left outside in unsafe, unsanitary, or dangerous conditions any longer. And this benefits us all. Next, we rebuild our public safety system. Here's what's important to know. The law says we can only enforce our no camping codes if the number of shelter beds matches the number of unsheltered homeless persons in the community. This means with my plan, by compassionately providing enough nighttime emergency shelters, the 72-hour posting requirement for camp removal will no longer apply, and we will no longer have tents and RVs in our community. This will have an immediate community-level impact by restoring livability to every neighborhood in Portland. Ending unsheltered homelessness ends our humanitarian crisis in Portland. Now, let's take a good hard look at where our city is today. Portland has lost tens of thousands of residents, many of them with families. Besides the shrinking population, we've also lost ground in almost every other metric. Over the past year, Portland had the worst job creation out of 50 cities. And our downtown foot traffic is at the bottom of the list. Our downtown core vacancy rate is at 30% and climbing, the worst in the nation. But the solution to reversing this is not complex. If we end unsheltered homelessness, restore livability and public safety throughout Portland, we will welcome an influx of jobs, investment, and families back to our nation. We had for 40 years previous to this last 5. The magic of Portland is still there. We just have to find it and ignite it. Why haven't we done this sooner? We lost progress since the 1990s. And in 2017, we switched to a model that doesn't work. They were great ideas on paper, and amazing people worked so hard to make progress. But in practice, it forced us into an untenable position. One department would hand out tents, and the other would sweep them. One law enforcement officer would arrest someone, and another would put them back on the street the same day. And for every person we got into housing, more than one person would become or arrive homeless. So, the leaders that are gathered here today will show us what is possible. We need to go back to the basics. We need to get it right. Now's our chance. After this plan has been implemented, we will get Portland back to being the most livable city in America again. And I'm asking each and every one of you to join me, and together we will repair, restore, and revitalize this most extraordinary city that we all love. So thank you for that opportunity. Thank you. So now we get to the point where we get to hear from the panelists, the guys who really know what they're doing, which is kind of the nice part of the night. So my first panelist is Mark Johnston. And Representative Gamba had explained about his illustrious record. I was in New Orleans about 6 years ago. I was running into classmates in tents on the street, and that's when I recognized that I had to change what was going on in myself, to learn more about it, to start advising others on how we can really help our community members. And I'd heard about an extraordinary woman, Martha Kegel, down in New Orleans, who had 10,000 people living on the street. And this was after Katrina, where they had 250,000 people unsheltered. And 7 years later, they had it down to 10,000. And in 2 years, or in a year, she had gotten it down to 1,000. Well, that's the sort of magic that we needed in Portland. So I went there to go find out. And I'm meeting with her in her office. And I finish, and I'm walking out onto the curb, and I started talking to a fella. And we had a great conversation. We started a ride share. We're riding back into Bourbon Street, where it was. Come to find out, the guy who was the ride share driver is doing his dissertation on homelessness. We start talking, and he tells me who he is, and I'm thinking, holy cow, this guy's really knowledgeable. And we hit it off. And unfortunate for him, I haven't stopped calling him in 5 years. I'm very proud to call him a friend today, but he's been a mentor. He's been somebody who would tell me, go to San Diego, because they've been able to have their law enforcement work with their homeless system, and they created this extraordinary court called the Homeless Court Program, and it helps homeless souls find a way through the criminal justice system and into housing. And I did, and I'd meet with the mayor's office, and I'd say, well, what's the next thing? And he'd say, well, go to Bergen County, or go to Rockford, Illinois, or Mississippi. And I would find myself in business appointments doing that. And he's been an incredible guiding light for me, and he's been an incredible guiding light for Portland. So I'd like you to welcome Mark Johnston to the stage. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Keith, for that kind introduction. And it's really great to be here, and good on you for coming out tonight to listen and understand some of the great ideas that Keith has for really making a big difference here in Portland. My first time in Portland was 1990. I was a relatively new person in the federal government working on homelessness for the Department of Housing, and I was working with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So it's the foundation that works with Johnson & Johnson, and we were doing a special homeless demonstration on how we could make a big difference for homeless families. But we only wanted to select really high-performing cities in America, and every state in America applied. I think it was maybe 7 or 8 were selected, and Portland, Multnomah County was one of those. Because for so many years, Portland has done such fantastic work and has such knowledgeable service providers to get it done. And over time, things have changed a lot, as Keith was describing. But I guess I want to underscore, I have been here a number of times over the years and have seen the great capacity that Portland has to make a huge difference on confronting homelessness. So during my 40 years, I have really been trying to be personally involved in learning and applying how to confront homelessness. Because you think about it, it affects every social ill we have, right? Mental health, substance abuse, incarceration, huge domestic violence issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like a really intractable problem. So for the first 15 years, and the federal programs were brand new, I was helping to implement them in every city and county in America, and I'm visiting countless cities and states trying to understand how we could do better. And we kept talking about we are addressing homelessness, because that's what you do when you have a social problem. Whether that problem is mental health, substance abuse, crime, poverty, what do? You address it. That's the word we used for years. And after we'd been doing this for 15 years, we realized we weren't getting anywhere. Because when you address a problem, you actually never reduce it, and you certainly never solve it. So we came to terms with the fact that we had to think differently if we were going to do something different on homelessness relative to all of these other social problems that also seemed intractable. So we looked at different cities. So I went to New York City, and they were costing about $50,000 a year per person to live on the streets. In Seattle, $80,000 a year to live on the streets of Seattle. Because they're not really just living on the streets. They're getting arrested, which has a cost. They're getting thrown into detox. They're going to the ERs. And not just one of those each time during the year, but often dozens of times. So they tracked the 100 people in Seattle that had been there the longest on the streets, and it was $80,000 a year, and at the end of the year, they were all still homeless. An absolute waste of public resources. So rather than addressing this problem, we realized we needed to shift our focus to actually ending something, because that couldn't be any worse than what we were doing. So we started looking at subgroups like the chronically homeless, which are the people you see on the streets all the time. People that are on the streets or in a shelter with disabilities like substance abuse or mental health, or veteran homelessness. So at the national level, we decided to start focusing on those two particular populations. And it was amazing that in a 5-year period, chronic homelessness, which is really the people you're seeing every day on the streets of Portland who are severely mentally ill and using drugs, was reduced by 28%. For veteran homelessness, it was 49% within a 5-year period. And I want to underscore how important a reduction is like that. So when I retired from the federal government towards the end of the Obama administration, the Trump administration asked me to come back to advise the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs on how they could be ending veteran homelessness. So I had an advisory committee of stellar, wonderful people. So we're meeting with the secretary, and I was just recounting that, you know, you've seen a 49% reduction in veteran homelessness. And he said, yes, and that's why I'm going to cut the program. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, literally, that's what I said. And he said, Mark, if you had said we had had an 80 or a 90% reduction, now that would be something to be happy about. But 49%, it's a failure. And I said, Mr. Secretary, and he has a lot of social problems with his veterans, right? Massive substance abuse, suicide, incarceration. I said, do you know any social problem that you're working on at the VA that you've seen a reduction on of any kind? And he kind of stopped and thought about it and realized he hadn't ever seen a reduction, let alone a year after year after year reduction that we've been seeing in homelessness. And so he chose not to cut the program. What we have realized is that was the nation. We had a 49% reduction, but we can do a lot better than that. And we have by individual cities. Because a 49% reduction is great, but it's not ending it, right? It's ending it for individuals, but not really ending it. So there are a number of cities that I was able to work with after I retired, and there was a brief reference to Built for Zero, and we're going to hear a lot more about it from Julia, that says we're going to actually end some form of homelessness in a city. It might be veteran, it might be street, it might be chronic homelessness, but let's focus on something because we can't do it all at once. No city, no matter what kind of resource you have, could simply end the entire problem of homelessness in a couple years. It's impossible. But you can take chunks of it, like the street population, or veterans, or the chronic population, to actually end it. Keith mentioned New Orleans. So when I was working in New Orleans, I was working with them on a couple of topics. They had just made some good progress on actually ending veteran homelessness. And the feds had called me to say, could you write this up? We want to understand how this actually happened. And it was impressive because New Orleans, contrary to Portland, had almost nothing going for it. They've had massive corruption in City Hall. The former mayor was in prison, for instance. They have huge challenge with crime, far beyond what you're seeing in Portland. All these problems, and yet they were able to come together when they had a crisis. So when Hurricane Katrina hit, and they had, as Keith mentioned, thousands and thousands of newly homeless people, there were 250,000 people that initially lost their housing. In a matter of a couple of years, they got their numbers down to 1,035 on the streets, when you'd been at nearly 10,000. So they got enough confidence to know they could do something sustainable. So he had just met, Mayor Landrieu had just met with Michelle Obama, who had been meeting with mayors to say, let's get something done on homelessness. Let's end, for instance, veteran homelessness. So he came back to New Orleans all pumped up. He was going to get this done. He invites all of the homeless providers, the local VA, the housing authority, everybody who had anything to do with homelessness. And he said, you know what? I just met with Michelle Obama, and I know we can end veteran homelessness. And he says, as he raises his hand, who will join me? And I know most of the people in the room, they did not believe he could get it done. It just doesn't. How do you end a problem, right? How do you end homelessness? But he kept his hand up, and they're like, this is the mayor. I mean, we get money from this guy. I think I'm going to commit a little bit. So that you see these tentative hands get raised. And he said, you know, I said we're going to do it in a year. Thank you for raising your hands. We're going to get it done in 6 months. And they did. They did because they had a very strong mayor who was committed to solving the issue. They did because they had a very bold goal, not addressing, but ending. And they did because they had specific measures. They're just going to get it done. And it changed the way the city thought about homelessness going forward. So I have had the chance to know Keith for 5 years, and I've been to literally countless cities, met with so many different mayors, city councilmen, all sorts of elected officials in the last 40 years. And I honestly have never met somebody as a private citizen, let alone a public official, who has spent so much time to know what the problem is. I mean, it was shocking that he said, well, Mark, I want to know more. What other city should I go to? What other than New Orleans? And he's mentioned, I was mentioning Bergen County, Rockford. I mentioned 4 or 5 places. He went to all of them on his own dime to understand what they did. But he's not just a thinker. He's not just a talker. Then he starts applying these things as a private citizen in Portland. That's the drive that's going to make something happen. And when I look at Keith, I know that and I'm not a political person at all. I was a career employee for all of these presidents. So I'm not a political hack in any way, but I've gotten to know Keith for 5 years very, very well. And I can assure you, if elected, a year from now, this city will look very, very different. And if he's not elected, it's going to look just the same or be worse. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You know, I had the great pleasure of meeting Mayor Landrieu from New Orleans twice in the last 2 years now. And I asked him, you know, how did you do that? Because Mark had recounted that story, and he said, get good people. And I just want to let you know, we have good people in this room right here, right now. We have everything we need. It's not money, not resources. It's people. We got good people in this room. So take that as advice right now. I also want to talk about fate. Fate is in our favor. I ran into Mark coming out of an office 3,000 miles away. Fate's in our favor as well. I ran for city council 4 years ago, and my campaign manager, Julie Lance at the time, come to find out, was a relationship or a friend of a friend who knew the mayor of Boise. And I said, well, Julie, that's a gold mine. They're doing great. Their numbers. People kept telling me, it can't be done. You can't end on shelter homelessness. Or I would find a community like New Orleans that had done it, and they've got 364 people living on their street. Well, yeah, but that's East Coast. That's a poor community. Housing affordability issues, more of an issue here. Can't be done on the West Coast. And it led me to Dave. Yes, it can be done on the West Coast. And here's a gentleman that I want to introduce you today that had the adversity of losing a court case, a seminal court case that all of us use as an excuse for not caring for our community. And when I talked to him and he said this word to me, he says, Keith, I had people living on the street. And he said, I told my team that we're not going to be a camping city. We're going to be a caring city. And then he told me what he did. And I've invited him here today to allow him to tell you what he did. It's extraordinary. Dave Beater, former mayor of Boise, thank you.
I have an aversion to podiums. Sorry about that. So I'm going to go mobile here and walk around. Before I start, I do have to do one thing in this beautiful church. 16 years of Catholic schools. I know you don't have to here, but I just had to get that out of the way. So I can talk now. Thank you for having me. What a great crowd. I just want to tell you a little bit about our example, how we were able to have the kind of success that Keith mentioned. Boise is a city of about 240,000. We're about 40% the size of Portland. We're not small. Obviously, we're not as big. The state of Idaho gives no state funding for housing, for social services, or for transit. None. We are a very limited form of local government. We have property tax capped at a certain level year over year. We have some other sources, but it's very limited. We can normally only do the very basics: police, fire, parks, libraries, those kind of basic services. So in order to have any kind of success beyond those basic services, the only thing we have is collaboration. If you take anything away from us, and I think all of us tonight would agree on that, the three most important parts of working on homelessness is collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration. You can take that note, bring it closer. Those are the things, it's the only thing that works. And so we did that. We just got people around the table, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and just started working. We called it a barn raising. What can you do to help us? Let's pick a direction. Let's all do what we can. And out of that came some real success. Success on chronic homelessness. Success on veterans homelessness. We built a detox center together. We built a family homeless program, first started in the city, and then it eventually transitioned to a nonprofit, and many, many other things that collaboration helped. But I want to spend some of the time I have today talking about camping, one of the toughest issues within the toughest issue of homelessness. Because I think our example in the city of Boise is perhaps the purest example of how prohibiting camping can work. That might be controversial to say, but I believe it, and let me tell you why I do. For years, we've had an ordinance in the city of Boise prohibiting camping. We still have it. It's still the law of the land right now. We had a lawsuit, Martin versus Boise, that was referred to. And we were in the process of litigating those issues. And mistakenly, our police thought that because of the litigation, they could not cite anyone for camping. They were mistaken in that. The judge said, during the course of the litigation, you actually can keep enforcing the ordinance. But word travels very quickly. Well, let me point out one thing. Our ordinance specifically says, if there's not a bed open for you, if there's not a place for you to go, you cannot issue a citation for camping. It's very specific. It was by policy. We made it very explicit in the ordinance. And that's what we did. In fact, our police officers would have 5 encounters with someone camping before they would issue a citation. They would approach them. They'd get to know them. They would warn them. They'd ask them about, try to direct them to services. If after those 5 encounters, they still camp, they would issue a citation. Not a single person ever went to jail with that citation. All we wanted was compliance. And they did, but during that time when our officers weren't citing, within a matter of weeks, a camp of 100 grew to 140 people sprang up in the city of Boise on a very limited piece of public property. And it was awful. It was a haven for drugs, for assaults. We actually had a homicide within the camp. And worst of all, people were preying on the vulnerable people in that camp. So we simply had to do so. So again, we just gathered people around the table, police and fire, and social service organizations, my office, everybody. We picked a date several weeks out. We advertised that date. We told the media. Of course, we told the campers. Bit by bit, we worked towards that date. And long story short, we were able to disrupt and have the camp go away without a single arrest, without a single incident. We took a rec center and made it our processing center. We had food, we had clothing, we had first aid, we had all the services that we could find. We had vouchers for hotels, but only for a couple days. The biggest pleasant surprise from that activity was about a third of the people, and we kept as good a records as we could, about a third of the people went home locally. And I'm defining home in a broad sense, but they went to relatives, they went to friends, they went home. Another third left the area, but we worked hard to find their families, to find services where they were going. And about another third went to shelters. And after that, we enforced the ordinance. We went from 300 or 400 citations in the early years after the disruption of the camp down to 6. In 2019, I checked it again, 6 citations. People will conform to that activity once they know what's going to happen. I used to think that people would migrate to an area because of programming. In fact, we used to fight the sort of right-wing elements of our city who would say, don't give homeless programming, all you'll have is more homeless. Frankly, it isn't true. It is, unfortunately, the lack of rules that causes people to migrate, and unfortunately, I think that's what you have here. So I'm here to say it works. It's why the governor of California has issued an executive order saying no camping on state property in California. The mayor of San Francisco has said the same about city property in San Francisco. The city of Austin, Texas, repealed their anti-camping ordinance. Their mayor and council repealed it. The citizens by initiative put it back. The city of Phoenix had a court order. They were sued for a 1,000-member camp by the businesses around it. If you have a chance, there's a great story about a little sandwich shop right next to this 1,000-purpose camp. I think it was a New York Times article. They fought and fought to keep their business open. It's still there. It's their retirement. It's starting to thrive again because the city of Phoenix did the job through millions of dollars and got the camp away. You know, it works, folks. I'm here to say that. But it only works when there are services to provide these folks. You know, the one without the other does not work. What it allowed us to do in Boise is concentrate all this collaborative energy on solving the problem, on building housing, on building veterans housing, chronic homeless housing, building programs to help families. And that is how we had success. People, the largest groundbreaking in 16 years as the mayor of Boise was when we broke ground on a chronically homeless residential development for 45 people. It was a nasty, cold, rainy day, winter's day in Boise, and I couldn't believe it. A couple hundred people showed up. People are hungry to help. They want to be successful. They want to see something will have success. And that traction allows you to build on it and allows you to do more and more. It is part, in my opinion, of having the ability to bring people in. Unfortunately, the great Chris Christopherson passed away recently. And I look around the room, and this crowd probably knows the line from Bobby McGee that freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. It's a great lyric. It's not good public policy. The social contract and the golden rule compel us to help each other, to look out for our neighbor. But part of that contract is to allow us to help you, to come in. If you won't come in, we can't help you. If you do, you can have great success. We had great success. You've heard about other places. There are models and places all around the country where it works. I am here to tell you, when you have some success, you're going to have more. And bit by bit, you will solve this problem. And we'll come back to Portland. In addition to your streetcar, which I am envious of your system, we will laud the way you've handled homelessness and solved it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to question and answer.
Outstanding job. That was a story that kind of really resonated with me, where David had mentioned that he was scared as mayor by adding up the services because he thought he was going to be a magnet for others. And he said after implementing it, it was completely the opposite. It was the absence of rules and absence of caring for your community that brought people to the community, which really surprised me. And it wasn't just the local, but it was the regional, but just caring for people. And then I toured his homeless shelter system in March, and I was astounded. In Boise, no person at any of the shelters are ever turned away. Isn't that the way it should be? Where we're never going to let somebody live or die on the street in 100 degrees or 10 degrees. Never turned away. And talking to these operators, exactly. That was something I learned from them, and that's something he set up. And that's a model, and that's a mantra that we're going to have in Portland. We're going to care for everybody, every day, and we can do it at low cost to not impact the community at all. The next person I'd like to introduce is Dan Steffi. So I was traveling all around the nation and all around the world, and everybody was giving me great advice. And then I met Commissioner Mike Lindberg, who's become a very dear friend. And he worked with Bud Clark, and I was telling him about all these secrets about ending unsheltered homelessness. He said, well, have you talked to Dan Steffi? Have you talked to Don Clark? And I said, well, no. Well, Don Clark was our executive director for Central City Concern. And Don was the architect of so many of our programs, our sheltering system, our sobering system, our cheers system. And then Dan Steffi worked hand in hand with Central City Concern, and as the assistant mayor for Mayor Bud Clark, brought an incredible program to Portland that turned out to be a model for the United States. And I'd like to welcome him here to tell us about it. Dan Steffi, ladies and gentlemen.
So a couple of things before I get started. First is, I have only one functioning vocal cord. And a lot of people accuse me of speaking half-truths. And I want to tell you, I hope that's not the case. And second, Mr. Mayor, thank you for bringing up Christopherson. The other verse that I would give you is, Lord, help me to shoulder the burden of freedom and give me the courage to be what I can. Now, I'm going to give you some woo-woo stuff, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history, and then I'm going to talk a bit about the mayor's plan. And the woo-woo stuff is this. I believe that there is something out there in the world that whenever you actually commit to doing something, all kinds of things come together to help you and achieve what you're after. That's the woo. I'll stop with that. The history is that this is a community that maybe has a dearth of civic leaders like we had several decades ago. Guys like Dean Gisvold, for those of you who have been around a long time, Bing Sheldon. Those two guys and others were the people, the force behind creating a thing called the Burnside Consortium. And that consortium, under the leadership of Bing and Dean, were wise enough to hire Don Clark as the executive director. And he renamed it Central City Concern. And Don was a guy who had been a county executive, sheriff in the county, ran for governor of Oregon. He knew everybody in all the leadership positions. And then Bud Clark, when he was a child, his mother came to Portland to get it for employment. He joined her later when she picked him up from Union Station. He wondered why she brought him to this community of a bunch of men standing around in the street. This was back in the probably 40s, okay? Where Portland was the primarily an agricultural center for fishing, timber, wheat, grain farms. And so people would come here for work in the season and winter over in the winter. And those are the people he saw on the street. At that time, per capita, Portland had more single room occupancy hotels than New York City, okay, because of that agricultural background. So fast forward a number of years, and at Christmas time, Bud's daughter, he'd been talking about the fact that Portland was on a, I won't say it, I can't go by without saying something negative about Donald Trump. I'm sorry. But anyway, he had been talking about the fact that Portland was on this dark trajectory with the current mayor. And he was thinking maybe I'd run for mayor. And his daughter gave him a present at Christmas addressed to the next mayor of Portland. And in January of '84, very short period of time before the primary, he announced that he was going to run for mayor. Along about that time, a person that I had worked with years ago said, we're going to have this campaign for this guy, and we don't know if we're going to get him elected, but we're going to have a hell of a lot of fun. And maybe you'd like to join. And I happened to be working in a job that gave me enough time to do that, and I got involved as a volunteer. And one of the people that I had met in a prior career was the woman who was the PR person for Tektronix. And she, around that time, left Tektronix, formed her own PR firm. Now you're saying, what the hell does all that have to do with this plan? The point is that without Don Clark being hired by Dean and Bing, and without mayor's daughter saying, go ahead and run for mayor, and without my friend connecting me to that campaign, I wouldn't be here talking about this. But what transpired was the mayor said, okay, we got a staff that he selected, and none of us had any public service experience, direct electoral office. And he said, we're going to do something about the homeless. And I was the only guy that had any inkling of social service background, which was very remote. I was looking for something exciting like economic development. And he said, you're the guy. Okay, so that was in January of '85 when he took office. By August, I had done a little bit of research, and we were at a meeting of the downtown, the Old Town Chinese Business Association. And they were telling him how difficult it was to run their business with people sleeping and using the toilet in their doorways. And so he said, damn it, I told you to fix that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the guy that you're going to hold accountable. That was in August. And in January of 1986, City Council passed an ordinance number 158185, that created the Emergency Basic Needs Committee. And its charge was to maximize the ability of the city and county to meet the emerging basic needs, develop specific policy, budget and planning communication recommendations, and produce a coordinated plan for the delivery of emergency basic needs services and declare an emergency. That meant that we had already adopted what became known as the mayor's 12-point plan. So, damn it, you're responsible. In August, January, it was adopted. How did we do the plan? Don Clark wrote the draft. He supplied the genius that created the plan, which was taken from the standpoint of a balanced approach, that we need to take care of the least among us, and we have to create an environment where our businesses can flourish, where we can have an orderly environment, that we can enjoy, we can have the peaceful enjoyment of our city. And so the 12-point plan said, for openers, you can't sleep on the street, but we will have always, every day, one vacant shelter bed. And if we find you sleeping on the street, the story will be, you can't sleep here, but you can sleep there. In order to get there, we went to the ACLU, we went to the homeless providers, and we said, this is a plan. What do you think? And they basically said, if you do that, we're fine, okay? But we all have rights, right? I have the right, if I own property, to make sure my front door isn't used as a toilet. And if I'm a person without a place to sleep, I have the right to seek some place that's safe and decent. And so that was the basic of the plan. But we went on beyond that to say, if we see a camp springing up, we're going to take it down. Because in the past, it had been a paramilitary operation once or twice a year. The police and ODOT, the sheriff, the dog control officer, everybody come up with all the lights flashing, and they'd tear down the camps. The homeless people would step across the road, say, thank you for cleaning it up, and come right back. So we set up a process where if we saw a camp, we took it down, and that was involving the city, the county, state, and that sort of thing. We look for ways to employ homeless people. At that time, what was now I don't know, their names changed. It was once the Association for Portland Progress, then it became Portland Business Association. Maybe it's something else now. Anyway, we went to them. They had just taken over operation of the city parking garages. And we said, hey, you're going to need somebody to clean those. And Transition Projects has people out that could do that. And I'll pay, when we adopted the mayor's plan, the city council sort of gave me a blank check of about $500,000 to be having some walking around money to do things. And so I was able to go to the Association of Portland Progress. I'll pay for the first year of that program if you'll take it over after that, assuming it's successful. And they said, sure. And that became kind of the beginnings of what became the Downtown Clean and Safe program. So, all of that to say that there are forces out there, Keith, that will join you and make this happen. And it may be those fickle folks on Mount Olympus that are picking out the winners and losers. I don't know, but they will come. And the ingredients that I heard other people talking about here are vision, commitment, and leadership. What do we got here? We got vision, we got commitment, and how many times have we been to a place that people were invited to come and say, let's talk about ending unsheltered homeless? That sounds like leadership to me. And so I'll leave you with one parting thought. And it's a thing that I send as a tagline periodically on some of my emails. And it's a quote from St. Francis. Start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you're doing the impossible. Let's do it.
We really are honored by these conversations today. This is the amount of history, experience, lessons that have been learned are extraordinary. Mayor Clark was bold. We know that. And he was the mayor of an extraordinary city. The thing that I took away from that as well was no person was turned away. There's kind of framing here that we're getting from mayors who really cared for their communities. No person was turned away. And one of the things that Dan may alluded to but was clear is Mayor Clark and Dan and Dawn Clark, ended unsheltered homelessness in 12 months. They had to plan it. They didn't have the luxury of having a plan ready to go like we do today. So I want to let everybody know there's enough naysayers in the world to say it's not going to get done. They don't have experience or they're not dreaming. But today you're looking at three individuals who have. Now I want to talk about bold, and that's when it comes to Julie Orlando. So I met her at the recommendation of Mark Johnston. And when I sat down with her, I knew I was on the right path when she said, yep, I was coming into work, had my son in the back seat, and there was a guy with a "I'm homeless, please help" sign on the side of the road. She told me she pulled over, she called him over to the car, and she says, hey, buddy, this is your lucky day. I happen to be the director of the Homeless Services Division for the county. And she said, you got two choices. You can jump into the back seat of the transport, a police car that's coming to pick you up right now, or you can take the sign down because you're telling my community members that I'm not doing my job. And in Bergen County, I've ended unsheltered homelessness, and you're telling them that I haven't, so what do you want to do? And when I heard that from her, I said, Mark, thanks for introducing me. This is the sort of person who says, I'm going to go, I'm going to care for my community, and I'd like to introduce Julie Orlando up to tell us some more about that.
Thank you so much. What he didn't tell you is we came home from a family vacation. We had no food in the house. And so I said to my son, don't even go in the house. Let's just get in the car. We'll go to ShopRite. We'll get some food. And as soon as my son saw the man, he goes, oh, here we go. And it was a half hour, but my children are unfortunately used to that. So I traveled, first of all, I just want to say this is the most extraordinary city. I spent the entire day touring it, talking with people. It's magnificent. I understand the passion. I understand why you're all here tonight. And so why did I fly 6 hours last night to get here? I did that because when you reach something like functional zero for chronic homelessness, when you're the first in the nation to do it, when it takes 9 months to prove that you did that, thank you, Mark.
Closer to the mic.
Oh, thank you. When you do that, you have the responsibility and the want to go everywhere you can to help other people do that. It's our responsibility, and that's why I'm here tonight, because I want to share with you a little bit about what we've learned in doing this work. Can I forward this? Okay. Here's me. Getting to zero. That's a big, bold, incredible goal. But what's important about tonight, and as I was sitting there and coming up at this juncture, I was thinking to myself, you have assembled like a Marvel team of like Avengers or something up here. Like, we should go out like as a team of people. I thought, this is incredible. These are people that actually have superpowers, that really understand the challenges. This is a wonderful author, researcher, Matthew Desmond, who wrote a book called Evicted. And he says that without stable shelter, everything falls apart. I believe that homelessness is a disaster. I actually got certified as a disaster relief counselor because what I learned was a response to homelessness is very much like a disaster, because everything is affected when we lose our homes. One of the most challenging parts about homelessness is when we don't have a sense of urgency. When it comes to abolishing poverty or solving homelessness, our problem is not a lack of resources. Our problem has been a lack of urgency, of understanding this as a problem to be solved now. If I am driving in my county of 1 million people in 70 municipalities and I see anyone, I'm there. I'm out of my car. I stop. Today, I probably saw at least 50 people. And that feeling that I have never goes away. I want to do something. I want to help. And so what we need is a sense of urgency. And what we need is bold leadership. Everyone here, these are bold leaders. Bold leaders bring the community together. And in response to that urgent need, in response to the disastrous effects of homelessness, this is a moral urgency that we have, and we need to address it. One of the big challenges with homelessness, and I happen to be someone who travels the country and talks to people from all over the country. And what I realize is that with the issue of homelessness, we want to point our finger and say, you're responsible, you're failing, the police are failing, community service, everyone's failing. And we need to understand that it's about all of us. We are all responsible in this crisis. All of us in our community are responsible for this. And so if we design a solution with that mindset, we can actually do that. And I think you've heard that from our speakers. It takes the entire community to get around this issue. And one of the things I want to say about, I'm often interviewed, people ask me, how did you do that? What was different about what you did? And it actually took me a couple of years to really narrow it down to a very simple concept. I did not take a position 15 years ago to end homelessness. I had already worked for 20 years in New York City in housing and working with people with serious mental illness and addiction and criminal justice. I came into this job with one plan. That was to change the way the community thought about homelessness. If we think differently about the people we're trying to assist, then we can change our systems. And from those changes, we can then meet a bold goal. Shelter is critical. They play a crucial role in our society as places where people can find safety and support and where they are facing difficult situations in their lives. I'm just watching television, and I'm watching all these poor people in Florida. And I feel it. I feel like they've lost their homes. how they're all feeling tonight, right now, when we all go home, right? Those people have lost their homes. And so this is where people can feel a sense of safety and support. Shelters are not just a physical space. They're reminders that in times of hardship, there are places and people ready to offer safety, support, and a chance for a better tomorrow. And they have a positive impact on our communities. I often say this when I speak to communities. If you do not have a place for people to be, they will be in places you don't want them to be. Everyone needs a place to be. They need a place to be. They need a place to sleep. They need a place to be during the day. They need a place to be. Also with building communities, homeless shelters serve as the hub of a community engagement and outreach. They offer opportunities for volunteers. Remember I talked about the community? But we want the community to be involved in a way that is supportive and working together. And in improving public health. One of the things I don't think people here realize, 6 months ago I left my position in the shelter because I felt I had really built a sustainable system. And I now work at our public safety net hospital. And the reason that I did that is because I felt when I was in shelter, I felt like I wanted more from the healthcare system. And now I get to do that and reach back and work together with our shelter system. Because leaders never stop leading, right? We just keep finding bigger and more challenging problems to solve. Mark had mentioned a little bit about community solutions. So when I was the director of the shelter, in about 2011, I decided to have our community join Community Solutions because I knew Roseanne Haggerty and all the work she had done in the city. So we joined in 2011, and we joined Built for Zero in 2015. And let me just say this, I was very nervous when we joined Built for Zero in 2015 because what I was saying is, we're going to end veteran homelessness, we're going to end chronic homelessness. And I thought, what if we don't do this? And maybe some of you in the room are thinking, you know, Keith's got this really big goal. Well, what if he can't do this? And let me just say this, what if you don't get every single person into shelter? How many people will you get into shelter? You have to really think about this. There's no bad in this work. For every person you house, for every person you shelter, every person you get off the street, every life that you save. We created a shared vision. You heard a lot about that tonight. This is a big problem in communities where you have lots of people with different ideas and they're all rowing in the wrong direction or in different directions. You don't get anywhere. You have to have a shared vision. Keith, you have a shared vision. It has to be a vision we can all get behind. This is an idea of we want to get everyone off the street, right? Isn't that the vision? That's a great vision. And we have a plan. Keith has a plan to do that. We learned how to use our data to inform decision-making. People are so afraid of data. But you need to have data because you actually have to know how you're performing. Where do you need to put your effort? Where do you need to put your resources? If you are struggling with certain people or certain areas, then it helps inform you about where you need to change, talk to another expert, talk to a mayor who's done that work before. That's what's great about Community Solutions. You can work with other communities who've done this already. So I know a lot of you are skeptical, but think about this. People have gone before us and have done this. You can learn from those communities that have had the same challenges and have overcome them. Identifying one group at a time. So for us, my goal when I was the director was to focus primarily on Hackensack. Our shelter was located in the city of Hackensack. There was a lot of scrutiny about when we designed our shelter, and everyone said, if you build it, they will come. I hear that everywhere I go. But you know what? We managed that. We did a warm handoff. If people came to us, we helped them get back to where they came from, back to family, back to another community, had them connect to where they needed to be connected to. So by focusing on our chronically street homeless, we were able to move those numbers and then worked on the next. Then we worked on veterans, and now we're working on families and also young adults, and eventually ending homelessness for all, which Rockford, I'm pretty sure, is going to do that before we do. A community of peers, having people to support you, that's really what Keith is developing. He's got a whole group of people here that have offered and committed to him to help him in this effort. So with this, we reached functional zero for chronic homelessness in 2017, and we reached, in the same year, 6 months later, reached functional zero for veteran homelessness. So you guys are thinking, what does that mean? What does functional zero mean? Functional zero means that the number of people coming into our system was less or equal to the amount of people that were going out of our system and into housing. It also meant that at the time where the United States Interagency Council to End Homelessness and HUD looked at our numbers, we literally were at zero for chronically homeless people, literally zero. The day that we actually ended it for our last person is the day that I submitted it to the federal government. But more importantly, too, not only have we achieved this, but we've sustained it. We've sustained those numbers because we've created a system that actually can be effective. I just wanted to show you this picture because these are all people from communities that have reached functional zero for one population or another. And this picture was from years ago. This is actually not a very recent picture. Many, many, many communities have done this since. But it is really about collaboration and working together. And I want to be clear about this. Collaboration doesn't mean, hey, we all like each other, so we're going to work together. Collaboration means that in order to do big, bold things, we all have to work together, because it's not about us, it's about the work that we're doing. And so if we collaborate and everybody brings their skills, their talents, their resources together for this vision that we all have agreed is the vision, you actually can attain that. Just a little bit more about collaborations. We know that when we have that common agenda, that shared vision, we can attack complex problems. Just a little bit about United States Interagency, right? What's really important here is what this is from a larger article that talks about when you have communities that are fighting about this issue, you're not going anywhere. You're just fighting about it. If we actually want to have results, right? Your shelter system, this system that you design, has to be supported by the greater community. It's incredibly, incredibly important that you support those efforts. So this is a slide. A lot of times when I'm in communities, they ask me about the impact of reaching functional zero and getting everybody off the street. When I was the new director of the shelter, I went up to the business district and I said, hi, I'm the new director and I'm really excited and I want to work with everyone. And I said, what is your goal here? And they said, we want to revitalize. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a big goal. But I said, that's okay. You know why? Because my goal to get people off the street and your goal to revitalize are part of the same thing. The way to do both those things is the same thing. So we're going to work on ending unsheltered homelessness. If you see this slide, this is what it looks like when you take people off your streets. This is all the new development that's going on in Hackensack, and if you don't believe me, you can Google it, you can take a look. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible that Hackensack has revitalized. So this is proof to me of what happens to a community, to a space, when you actually eliminate the majority of your street homelessness. But I also always remind them that even though we've done that, you have to keep making sure that we have places for people to go. It doesn't end there. It's a consistent change that has to happen. This is a little bit about me. It's been such a privilege to be here tonight. Thank you so much, and my best to all of you. Thanks.
The thing that I took away from Julia early on was disaster mindset. The word just kind of hit me strong, where I thought, anybody's living on the street, shouldn't we treat it like that? That's not a negative, that's a positive. We all rush to help, and it's an extraordinary concept when you think about it, and she says it often. I appreciate it. I framed this presentation, and I began that you must end unsheltered homelessness first. And that's what all of these panelists have just talked to you about. Julia is one of our nation's leader. She was the first to end homelessness because she ended unsheltered homelessness first. An extraordinary person with an extraordinary county. And then I want to frame that as far as numbers. So Bergen County is across the river from New York City. Tonight in Julia's county, I don't know if it's the same size as Manhattan or not, a river apart, she has a few dozen people living in her county. In New York City, they have 60,000 people that are homeless tonight. When you think about mindsets, we have to stop putting up barriers on us working together and really focus on all of us coming together. And that's what these panelists have just talked about. Now we're going to move on to the practitioners. So I hear a lot, well, we're going to repurpose assets. How can we do this quicker? A temporary alternative shelter site takes 2 years to set up. It's for 200 people. We grew unsheltered homelessness 887 people last year. Those numbers don't work out. You cannot set up shelters to take 24 months to add 200 units of capacity when you're growing at 800 plus per year. We have to think about this as a disaster. We have to have a disaster mindset, come together and act now. So I'm happy to introduce the next 4 panelists. These are practitioners that are local leaders that have set up shelters, all of them within 90 days. And so I'd like to welcome up Chris Iosa first. He was the founder of Do Good. And when I met with Chris, we had breakfast about 5 years ago, and I was telling him about this concept I've been learning, talking to Mark and Dave and everybody. And I says, and we can set up a shelter really fast. And he says, Keith, I've already done it. And so I'm invited him here to tell you how he's going to do it. Thank you.
I think I'm shorter than everybody else. Don't worry, I'm a professional public speaker, so I've done this a lot, and this is usually how it goes. This is really personal for me. The funny thing is when I get emotional, most people think maybe I'm nervous. I'm not. I have that curse of when I talk about things that I'm really passionate about. I stood at this very pulpit almost 9 years ago. That's good. Don't worry. We're good. This happens, trust me, every time. We're good. Just need a warm up. In 2015, I founded an organization called Do Good Multnomah. As a veteran, I was tired of veterans falling through the cracks. We got our 501c3 status in May of 2015. I bring that month up because it's important. Because by September of that year, I convinced the city to fund a shelter program to serve houseless veterans. And at that time in Portland, sheltering in churches was not a popular idea. In particular, having a shelter for individuals that had companion animals, pets, to bring into their shelters was also not an idea. And I wanted to do that. So in September of 2015, when the city said we would actually fund a winter shelter for veterans, you just have to find the space. I got it. There are so many churches in Portland that would open up their doors to host a shelter. And so I started to have conversations with churches all around the city. And it didn't matter what side of the river I was on. They said that it was a better idea if it was on the other side of the river. And then I came here. And they said, yeah, you just have to speak to our congregation. So 9 years ago, almost to this day, Kara was there. Hi, Kara. I must have done a really good job because the congregation said yeah. And I would implore all of you, before you leave, take a walk downstairs. There is a tiny little room. It is their gallery, where I was able to serve 13 male identifying veterans. And their companion animals for the next 9 months. And the reason it only lasted 9 months is because our wait list doubled and tripled, because this was the place where veterans wanted to be. They were treated like human beings. So that meant I had to find another church, and we doubled in size, and we kept growing and growing and growing. This work is personal to me. It's important to me, and it's real. I know we can do it. I've done it. I was speaking to a reporter from the Oregonian earlier this week, and they said, you know, Keith's plan is really ambitious. And I said, yeah, it is. I can get behind ambitious. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. You know, it's just, thank you, Chris. And on behalf of my campaign manager, thanks for being brief. So let me tell you about resources. So Shelter Portland has 19 facilities already highlighted that would like to help. We have 3 facilities that would like to help for day shelters. We need to stop thinking about, will it work? People are lining up to help in Portland. We've already achieved. We just need the job to get going. The next person I'd like to invite up is Andy Goebel. He's another one of our practitioners here in Portland who's done extraordinary things, who's partnering with Chris. Come on up, Andy.
Thanks, Keith, and thank you, Chris. I'm going to be honest, Chris's passion for this work is a huge reason why I'm in this work. And it's Keith's sense of urgency around this issue that's driving me as well, because I got into this work because of a sense of urgency. When I first moved to Portland to plant a church 13 years ago, we inherited a building, and there was a couple sleeping down in the stairway leading to the basement. And I got to know them and know their situation, and I reached out to the divine in whatever way and said, how do we make it so that these people don't have to sleep in this stairway? And so we started as a church to think about that, and we began to, we opened what was the only emergency winter shelter in North Portland out of our church, all on a volunteer basis. And it was beautiful. We would get people out of the deepest winter cold, and it was not funded by anyone. We just did it out of the goodness of our hearts. And it was beautiful, but it wasn't sustainable. And eventually, I got to know Chris Ayosa. And I became part of the board of Do Good Multnomah, and Chris said, love the vision that your church has. What if Do Good came alongside and we were able to fund your church to not only do it on an emergency basis, but to do it every night during the winter season? What if we staffed it? And by the way, part-time Pastor Andy Goebel, what if we hired you to be the manager of that shelter, and you could run that shelter? And I said, that sounds pretty good, because substitute teaching it kind of sucks. So I'll go for the shelter manager gig. And so Chris came along, and Do Good came alongside of us. And again, it was this sense of urgency that Chris has, that I know Keith has, that was all about, how do we get people off the street tonight? How do we make sure that people don't have to sleep in a tent when it's too cold to sleep in a tent? And Chris helped us to see that, and that led me toward this work that I'm doing now with Sunstone Way, which Chris helped me to found 3 years ago as an organization. And the whole goal is this sense of urgency around this crisis that we've talked about in our city. How do we deal with this right now? How do we make sure that people don't have to sleep on the street tonight? And that's the sense of urgency that drives us. That's the sense of urgency that I know that all of you are sensing as well. And that's why I can come alongside Keith and say, okay, let's go. That ambitiousness that Chris talked about, let's go. But here are the other reasons why I appreciate what Keith is doing. I appreciate it because Keith is not saying, let's supplant, let's get rid of what is being done now in terms of dealing with homelessness in our city. It's incredibly important that we realize that there is a need for this kind of care all along the continuum. We need 24-hour shelters. We need motel shelters and village shelters, and we need congregate shelters, all of which Sunstone Way runs. We need those resources as well. And Keith has said, Andy, I don't want to do away with those, but we need this immediately to make sure that people aren't sleeping on the street tonight. We need to take this kind of ambitious plan to do that. And I appreciate that about the urgency and ambitiousness about what that Keith brings to this. And here's the other piece that's incredibly important for you all to hear, is that Keith is committed to making sure that people who work in this business, that work with our most vulnerable population, that they make a living wage, that they are taken care of. I'm going to tell you tonight, I'm going to speak with very real honesty that our organization has sheltered individuals who work for other agencies who do sheltering. That's real. And Keith has said that's ridiculous. We don't want to do that. So the plan is to make sure that people are taken care of. Because if we take care of the people who are taking care of people, they will be better cared for. And Keith is committed to that. And that I can get behind. When I told Keith, I don't want you to expect that we can do this on the cheap, and he said, I'm not wanting to do that. I want to take care of people. I want to take care of staff, and I want to take care of the souls, as he would say, the souls that are living on the street. And so that I can get behind. And so I appreciate, again, your compassion, your guidance, all of that, Chris, and also your sense of urgency, Keith. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Andy Goebel for mayor, right there, I'll tell you. So what Andy has allowed me to do is I'm a numbers guy, right? Everything has a direction. What Andy and Chris allowed me to do was get into the shelters and understand the costing and paying a livable wage that Andy said, here's the wage with full benefits, with union-type livability wrapped around it. We can deliver life-saving care per person per night for $19 per person. Here's what's extraordinary. A Safe Rest Village, which is doing well, right? We all know about Safe Rest Villages, tiny villages. Per person per day, it's $189 per person. What Chris and Andy are delivering at a tenth of the cost is immediate care, life-saving care to make sure somebody gets through the night and gets to their job the next day. Extraordinary opportunity. And thank you for allowing me to look at the books and get in and understand all the parts and pieces, because when I say for $25 million we can end unsheltered homelessness, I'm saying it because we've done the numbers, we've done the work, we've done the research, and we have a roadmap that's ready to go. I'd like to invite up Matt Huff, who's been a partner in crime for 4 years. He's allowed me to sleep in his shelters. We've set up test shelters. I've asked my wife to come and stay with me, and she keeps refusing. But I've had the opportunity of have my lived experience council come and stay with me and interview homeless souls at night, ask them what worked, what didn't work, so we can deliver a plan that's ready to go. We'll make mistakes, but we know that we've got those individuals at the center of what we're planning on doing. Matt, come on up.
Well, good evening. My experience or journey with working with people in extreme poverty or homelessness started like 20 years ago when I moved from my small town in West Virginia. It's where I'm from. Don't hate me. to Kansas City, where I became a chaplain at a rescue mission. So I served at a rescue mission in Kansas City for a couple years, and then we moved to Prineville, Oregon. It is a thing. And I was a pastor there, and everywhere I've been, God puts me in places to serve people in extreme poverty and homelessness. And so when we were in Prineville, we served as a shelter. Our church opened as an emergency shelter. And then the county said, can you run our shelter? So we ran their shelter for a couple of years before starting a nonprofit to manage shelters in Central Oregon. And then 10 years ago, I moved to Portland and thought, now I don't have to do this work anymore. And then we started moving tents off the front steps of our church. And again, God said, this is the work you're supposed to do. So we opened our church as a shelter. For the first couple of years, we worked with Clackamas County. It was an extremely low barrier shelter. We did it with no money. We just opened the doors, put down no mats. We actually just gave out blankets, and people slept on the floor and had a blanket. But 100 people a night, every time it was cold enough, would sleep in the church. And then we started working with Union Gospel Mission about 5 or 6 years ago. And so we've been running a shelter with them every night of the winter from November through April. Again, we're a small church, no funds, but we were able to do it for, I think it's around $15, $16 a person per night. 45 people a night. Last year, we provided shelter to over 600 different individuals. And our church still gets used 24 hours a day in the winter. So at night from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., it's a shelter. During the daytime, it's a center for Albertina Kerr from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. From 3 p.m. to 8, it's a ping pong club. And then on Sundays, it's a place of worship. So it gets well used, and it's a joy to be able to serve the community in that capacity. But all that to say, one of the biggest things I've learned in the last 20 years in working with the homeless population is that shelter is essential. But the shelter itself isn't the solution, it's the first step towards it. And it's kind of been mentioned up here several times tonight, but it's the place where people feel safe. It's the place where people can develop trusting relationships. And so as we've served at shelter, the shelters I served in Kansas City, the shelters I worked at in the Central Oregon, the shelters in Portland, as you serve with people and they feel safe and you build the relationships, they then trust you in your recommendations towards other services, and they'll actually take you up on it. We also run Agape Village. Several of the people that have moved into our village lately are folks that have trusted us to spend the night in our building. So it's that trust and it's those relationships that shelter provides the opportunity to develop and to grow that leads to the solution of actually ending homelessness. So it's possible for us to do what Keith is talking about. We've been doing it for 8 years. We've done it in other places. I've seen it done in other cities, rural, small towns, big cities. It's possible. I know we can do better at loving our neighbor. Thanks.
So when Chris opened up a shelter at this location, it was all benevolence. It was all free. What Matt and Andy and I have discovered that we can add so many more facilities if we pay the providers a decent rent. So what we've determined is if you can staff or hold 50 people at night, you get and earn $4,000. And when you think about a church or a business, someone trying to pay their taxes, a roof that needs to be repaired or a side that needs to be painted, it's meaningful. 100 souls per night, $8,000. Yes, we have 13 facilities, and almost every community I ask, they say, we're in. It has to be something to give and take from the community. We aren't asking for anybody to do this for free. Caring for our community, as Mark said, saving $80,000 for the community per person, certainly we can give $8,000 to a facility for 100 souls per night. It's an extraordinary opportunity that I learned through Matt and Andy. So I mentioned it in my speech. Yes, nighttime emergency shelter is the first inning. And Andy talked about the continuum. But it's what's the next inning? A lot of people are working the next day, but a lot of people need help. Sometimes we think it's behavioral health, but when you're living on the street, it also looks like survival mode. They look the same. But when you bring somebody in at night and you start trusting them and they trust you and they sleep and dream and eat, they can slowly come out of that and you realize It was just a person that began their journey down on their luck but spiraled out. All we need to do is help them with that step to the next part of their life. And so to do that, Shelter Portland had an opportunity where we were offered a facility, and Andy and Chris and Matt and I, we know how to set up nighttime emergency shelters. We know what we're doing, but we need that day shelter to connect a person that isn't working with services, to find that need, to address the disaster, to get them on that road of recovery or work or workforce development. And Crystal Delahante, come on up here, Crystal, answered that phone call. We had a facility, and we said, we want to partner with you. She was doing extraordinary things out in Lentz Park. And we said, how about if we give you a roof? Can we supercharge your program? And I'm telling you, she's the most extraordinary person in Portland, because she took this 1 or 2 programs that she has and she's turned it into a resume of offers to our East Portland residents. Crystal?
Hi, I'm Crystal Delianti. I'm the founder and executive director of PDX Saints Love, which operates the day center on 82nd and Ash. I am also a person in long-term recovery with lived experience from both homelessness and substance use, and my last arrest was a mile away from the day center. In the recent years, our city has faced immense challenges: homelessness, addiction, and gaps in services. City and county outreach teams have tried to meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness, but still there are significant gaps in providing adequate shelter and support. Many seeking services face barriers, and the number of available beds is far too limited. On any given day in this city, there's only maybe 4 or 5 available shelter beds compared to the thousands of individuals who are living on our streets right now. We knew that we had to do something bigger than a couple of outreach workers making a couple of contacts a day. We needed a central place for people to come and take respite, meet basic needs, connect to services, and become part of our community again. We recognize that homelessness is multifaceted, and that we need to care for the whole person and provide more than a street-side referral to motivate people towards better outcomes. In December, we were connected to Shelter Portland, where we were able to organize and arrange for an old church building on 82nd Avenue in East Portland. Within 90 days, together we set up a day center with 4 drop-in days per week. Those drop-in days offer hot meals, showers with bathrooms, clothing, hygiene, wound care, charging station, overdose prevention, and fentanyl education. They also have access each of those days to a community health worker or certified recovery mentor who does shelter referrals, detox and recovery referrals, connections to healthcare, housing navigation assistance, and one-on-one peer mentoring. Through case management, we're able to assess barriers that people face to stable housing and work together and eliminate those barriers. Things like identification, birth certificate, accessing funds to meet old debts, connecting to rent will classes, and expungement clinics. Individuals also have access and opportunity into our workforce development program. That consists of 2 tiers. The first tier being very low barrier with just ad hoc pay. Someone can come in, work for 4 hours, and get cash at the end of the day. The second is a little bit more intensive with the 300-hour internship. They get paid $17 an hour. At the end of that internship, they get a $1,000 completion bonus to help eliminate things like old debt, remove barriers, buy a car, maybe a deposit on an apartment. Through that workforce development program also comes an opportunity to participate in the homeless court program that Keith founded, where individuals who complete the 4 months of Tier 2 internships can then meet with the justice system and remove misdemeanor convictions and fines, removing barriers for future employment and housing. Through that internship, we also offer a safety zone around our shelter to ensure that the neighborhood is clean of garbage, as well as making immediate contact with individuals who may be living unsheltered and connect them back to our day center services. The safety zone is a vital part of this work, ensuring that our neighborhood, who has been completely impacted by this current crisis in our city, is also heard, seen, and valued. Thank you guys for being here tonight to show that you too have a desire for every single person in Portland to be seen, heard, and valued, and that you have a desire to make action I appreciate you.
Thank you, Crystal. It's an incredible resource that we have to have in our community. We have to think about that second inning, the third inning, the fourth inning, and move people through that process. And our focus and goal is always to house the homeless. Always keep it in mind. That's our North Star 100% of the time. I want to just piggyback off of what Crystal had talked about. She has created what's called a Shelter Worker Training Program. We have grants from the Workforce Development Commission here in Multnomah County. They give us for 6 full-time employees funding to help these individuals join the workforce. And Dan and I were talking just a few moments ago. I want to talk about the incredible people that are manning and assisting and working in our homeless service provider system. They are extraordinary peer support individuals, and we do need to just give them a clap because many of them are in this room right now. They do extraordinary work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All of the stories that you've heard tonight can be found on Shelter Portland. If you want to look at any of the data, the research, the budget for ending unsheltered homelessness, we're fully transparent. Everything is out there. Anybody can use this. Take this home, talk to others. We can end unsheltered homelessness if we work together. The programs are already there. I'm not creative. This is not rocket science. I work really hard. I build best practices and I build friendships and we focus on peers and then we put these plans together. And I know one thing in business that I've learned. You try, you fail fast, you improve and you try again. And it's a virtual cycle. You just keep moving. And that's what we're going to do in Portland. And we're not going to stop until we care for everybody in Portland and have the opportunity to ensure everybody has a safe place to sleep tonight. All right. So we've only got a couple minutes left. Chris, if we've got a question or two, just point it out to an individual, to one of the panelists. Instead of all 8 of us, we'll be here all night. Let's just start with the young lady in front and go ahead. Sure, yep. Here, we got a mic for you too.
Excited about this, yeah, okay. Nope. All right, that's right.
Check, check. There you go.
Get my question here. Oh, all right. First, I want to thank all of you for being here. It's a fantastic panel, and I learned a lot tonight, and I'm very excited, and I want to be a part of this. So I know that one of the problems, know we want to do shelter first, and I know seems to be problems with people feeling safe in shelters overnight, and I don't know what you can do about that. And then, the next step, I guess, is the services, and that always seems to be a roadblock. So I kind of wanted to ask about that. How are we going to address that?
So let's assign that to Matt. Matt, let's talk about safety. The gentleman that you're sitting next to actually came for a tour at our shelter, and one of the things you find out is that it's more humane. We assume they're chaos, but these are just people looking for an opportunity to sleep through the night. Matt, you want to handle that? Oh, hey, we have. There you go. Thank you.
I think safety is a big concern for people that are hosting the shelter, but it's also a concern for those staying there because they want to feel safe. And so, what we do at our shelter is we have simple rules that everybody's aware of, and when people break those rules, there's consequences, and we make sure that there's nobody's ever guessing as to what is allowed or not allowed, and it's just clear as soon as you walk in, this is what the expectations are, and we communicate to everybody when you come in, this is a safe place to sleep. If you're not interested in a safe place to sleep, this isn't the spot for you, is how we handle those situations.
I'm just going to piggyback on that and say I think one of the most important pieces when it comes to safety and shelter is staffing. We all have stories, and I've heard Chris tell stories of working in the gospel mission and being 2 people with 100 people there in shelter. We have to have robust staffing. It's what we're committed to at Sunstone Way. It's what those who are doing this work on the front lines realize, that if you have a robust staffing model and you have enough people to be able to engage who are properly trained, and that's the other thing that's incredibly important. If people are trained in de-escalation, if people know how to respond to overdoses or the number of things that can happen in shelter, the more that shelter participants experience and know that there are staff there, enough staff to keep them safe, enough staff that will have eyes on the entire place and are trained should something go down, and it will go down. If they know that, then the sense of safety is elevated tremendously for folks who are living in shelter.
I'm going to piggyback off that. The final thing I would say is, you would be surprised how just being kind and humane to human beings, it goes such a long way. Individuals and families that are houseless are tired, they are cold, they are wet, and they're used to being treated like the pariahs of society. So if they are welcomed and treated with dignity and respect, it goes an awful long way.
Here. Arlene, ask your question. Yep. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ava Beatty. I'm so glad to be here, and mad respect to so much of my here. I worked for 30 years working with people who are unhoused and emergency medicine doctor. And I'm really stuck on the word unsheltered, because some people need shelter for a brief period of time. What they really need is housing. They don't need a mat. Did you see that picture of those mats? And I want each of you to think really hard what it would be like if you had to sleep on one of those mats for night after night after night. How would you hold down a job? How would you manage your mental health? How would you manage your substance use? Shelters are critical, and they're just the first inning. And I don't know why we're not talking more about the second, third, and fourth innings, because just doing shelters ends up being inhumane. It traumatizes the traumatized. It makes it impossible to hold down a job. So I do have a question, and my question, I actually have a two-part question. Number one is, of the politicians here, how many of you have spent multiple nights in a shelter?
Can I address the first comment?
We should let Julia take that one. Yeah, I think it's an important. Julia, you want to take? Yep. Thank you, Chris.
Actually, thank you for your work also. Thank you, because that's so important. I agree with you. My answer is yes, everyone needs housing. Until that can happen, until we can have housing, if we're not willing to shelter people right now, are we ready to house people right now? Do we? No, that's the second question. I'm answering the first question. Yeah, I'm just answering the first question. So I'm in full agreement, because I do believe I would like to see everyone to go to housing, but until the time when we can do that, we need to be sheltering people. So I'm in agreement, but getting people off the street, because when we get people off the street and we have our day centers, we get people by name. That's how you end homelessness. That's how you get people into housing. That's how you gather data. That's how you gather trust. It's a process, and it takes work. So yes, I agree with you. And until the time that we can do that, and that would be wonderful, this is an important first step. And now we can answer the second question, and I'm going to hand it to you.
For multiple nights in a row, not just one.
I ran the shelter, ma'am. I'm not a politician. You asked, so I'm going to have a politician answer that. Hold on. Go ahead.
Well, I used to be a politician. I'm no longer one, but I actually asked our shelters. I wanted to spend at least a night, maybe several, in the shelter. And they said that would not be a good idea. They could make me look different or a disguise, but they said, we don't want you to do that. So I went to food banks, I went to shelters. I spent the first 6 months in office visiting everything, talking to everyone. But I was, for better or worse, they said, we don't want you to stay here. We don't think that's a good idea.
I'm going to jump in because I think I can assume the answer is no for everyone up there.
No,
unless
no.
I have one more comment, and then I'm going to go because there are a lot of people waiting. Okay. Oh, then answer, by all means.
It's 8:30. So what I want to do is, I want to answer that question. So one of my leadership council members is in Brisbane, and he set up a parking garage. And he was sheltering people in a parking garage. And I talked to Dave about this, and I said, Dave, if we're sheltering cars with more dignity than we're sheltering people, our community is not right. So I tried it in a parking garage, and I spent the night. And again, I asked my wife to come and spend the night with me, and she didn't. So I slept in a parking garage, and I set up a shelter. And then Matt allowed me to set up a shelter in his church. And I asked lived experience individuals to come in, homeless souls. I've worked in shelters throughout the course of the night. I've been doing this every year, doing the work, trying to do my best. So I'm going to answer your question, and the answer is unequivocally yes. And I will do it over and over again until we help and end this crisis on our street. So it is 8:30, my friends. I want to be respectful with everybody. I really appreciate all of you coming and listening. Yes, I recognize there are divergent conversations, different opinions, but that's what we're here to work through. We're going to have these hard conversations, but we can't leave people on the street. Chris, did you have a comment?
We have a little more time if you want to do a little more Q&A.
Oh, we do?
I just want to be respectful of everyone's time, but there's more time.
Let's. But you guys can exit as you see fit. But would the panel mind sticking around for a little while? Would you mind, Matt, Chris? Okay, let's ask away. Yeah, let's do questions. Let's go over here, and we'll just go. And she wants to. But I am going to ask that the questions be quick. We have an incredible panel here, everybody. Quick question, and if you could ask it to a particular person, that would help out as well.
Hi, everybody. My name's Olivia Madlock. Nice to meet all of you. I want you guys to just take a look around the room. I think there's only like 1 or 2 other people of color in this room. Okay, maybe 4. And as we know, I don't know if you guys know the racial history of Oregon and how it was written in the Constitution until 1980 that people of color were not allowed here. And I'm curious what your organization is doing to end racial, whatever, I don't know, what's the word? Thank you. Racial disparity. There we go. What are you guys doing to end racial disparity? How are you supporting BIPOC homeless people? And also, I'd like to ask a question to you specifically. I don't know your name. Yeah, you. Why do you say that we can't house people? Why is the budget not transparent? Why is the budget not transparent? Where's the money going? Because in my mind, I don't know, how much money did they give?
Olivia, do you have a question?
I'm literally, I asked like 4 questions. Did you not hear me?
I did.
Sorry, this is a very heated conversation because your whole panel is white. Your whole panel is white. Your whole panel has never been homeless. So we're speaking to people that we're speaking to people who don't even understand the problem. I'm allowed to be angry.
No, it's
okay. I'm allowed to be angry. And if you are not angry about this problem, you are not really here to solve the fucking problem. Excuse my language. But for real, where's the money going and what are you doing for BIPOC people? Yeah. I'm ready. Where's the money going and what are you doing for BIPOC people?
Okay. So I'm vice chair of Word is Bond. We mentor Portland's future leaders, and they are young black men, oftentimes living in low-income areas. I take them camping every year. I work with them, and I spend time with them every month, and I help mentor these young men that came from North Portland that were poor like me one day to help address the disparity. And so that's what I do every month. But Julie, did you want to answer that question?
Well, I just had an observation, and then we can get to this lady here. This community is one that has spent literally $1 billion, $1 billion building affordable housing in the last few years. And we still have thousands of people on the street, which is not safe, which is not sanitary, which is not humane. So let's deal with humanity, and while we continue to spend billions more building the affordable housing.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Olivia, for your question. I appreciate that. Let's ask another one. You have a question?
I'm going to ask more.
Yeah.
I'm going to
okay.
answer the question.
Okay.
Okay. I'm answering your question. I am from Liberia, West Africa. I have been homeless several times. It is not that they cannot house people. It's the fact that people need to want to be housed. You understand? They have the housing out there. Okay. I've lived in Portland. I'm older than you. But since June of 1990, I've seen Portland grow. I've also seen Portland fall. We are at a critical point in Portland right now where we cannot at any time afford to bring any racism in any kind of progress in Portland, in the community of Portland. This ain't about black, this ain't about white, this is about a community that needs to stand together.
Thank you.
It is very important
Thank you.
for us as human beings to recognize one another as human beings, not as you're from this place, I'm from that place.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Do you have a question? Okay. I know. Okay, but thank you for your time. Let's do this gentleman over to the right, and then we'll move to you in the back on the left. Okay? Hi.
Thanks a lot. This is to Chris particularly. Keith, you bring up the dollar amount of $19 per person per night and give $8,000 to 50 people housed per night, etc. Crystal, what is your budget for taking care of the daytime? Because we get it out of the shelters at night, and they're right back in the streets.
It's a great question.
For this last year, it was $480,000 for a staff of 7. We see upwards of 100 and 120 people a day. We have 948 people enrolled actively in services right now. In the last 2 months, we have sheltered with long-term housing goals, 79 people. So $480,000 for this last year.
Yeah, I do. That's a great question. So it's $28 per person for a day shelter guest, but that is us being very lean. Katie, I can't recall her last name, Rosehaven is $54 per person per day. Day shelters are not expensive because you're coming in with clinicians and a lot of services, but you don't need as many. And what we envision is 1 or 2 per district. Because if you are housed, we want to be able to connect you with the day shelter to connect into the county services, because you may need $200 or $300 to make your rent. The last thing we want you to do is become homeless. So a day shelter is not only for the homeless, but it's also for the housed to connect you with services. They're very important. And we want you as community members, if you have a neighbor or you're in need, we want you to link to the district day shelter for assistance for whatever may be needed, because we do not want to have you housed. That's how we connect the services. But I met with our county chair about 12 weeks ago, and I asked her to consider dividing up the resources. The city at $25 million or less would take the shelter to make sure that everybody's cared at night, and the county, which is focused on health and human services, would take the day shelters. And so we're talking about that right now. So thank you. Let's go on the left side over here. You guys are sticking around. Good job. Thank you for the question.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you all for being here. It's really an extraordinary panel. I would just love a real quick rapid fire, just for Keith gets voted into office as advisors to him. What are the first 3 things you would tell him to do? Dan, first 3 things, just 3 words. What does Keith need to focus on?
Julia.
I'm sorry, I'm about 3/4 deaf, so I don't know what you just said.
First 3 things you tell him to do after
The first 3 things that I would tell Keith to do, well, I'll do that with a story, okay? I was in a session one time with Bill McCormick, and people were asking him, how do you create a successful restaurant? And he said the first thing you do is find a Doug Schmick, okay, was his partner. And in our case, it's find a Don Clark, because he was the visionary that started that. But he's already on the right track. The first thing is bring the community together around a vision. The second one is make sure that everybody understands that your commitment is unflappable. If Bud had not had my back every minute, we would not have succeeded. And the third one is don't wear out.
Go ahead, Dave.
Keith's already done a whole lot of the things that I would suggest. Collaborate. Third thing would be get a dog, because if you want a friend in politics, you got to have a dog. There won't be anybody else.
I can't move that fast because it's 12 o'clock for me. The first thing I would do from my experience is actually get in writing commitments that people are going to bring whatever their resources, their skills, their talents, whatever the piece that they have here, that they commit to that. It's very, very important with partners to get that in writing. I think, secondly, I think it would be very, very important to make sure, especially with law enforcement and with some key people, that there's an understanding of like a no wrong door, really establishing a way to work with people in that way. And then thirdly, which I heard tonight, which I want to put a fine print on here. You know, this is a complicated thing that you're trying to do and that cities are trying to do. You need good, talented, experienced, committed people, and you have to pay them well, and you need to take care of them as well. And I would just make sure to reinforce that, because you put the right people on the bus, this is going to work. This is going to get you where you have to go. But we have to take care of those talented people, like the 4 people that are over here. Thank you.
That last one was the first one I was going to mention as well, is bringing in excellent people. There's deep capacity in Portland for doing this kind of work. People that really have been very experienced with it, including the people here. The second is to really communicate it well. As I've seen many other cities, if the mayor doesn't communicate very well as they're going forward, you really lose hope and you lose support. And the third is to track it very carefully so you can show the progress you're making, because it seems intractable at first, but as you're tracking the data, you can see the progress.
Okay. Let's just one more question, and we're going to go to the ladies in the back right there. And thank you for sticking around, everybody. Let's make this the last question, and we're going to call it a night and set you back out into the evening.
All right. Hello?
Hello. My name is Jennifer Sedlock. I work with housing navigation at a hotel shelter. And I do have a legitimate question, but I don't feel a little controversial first. And I need to say that as someone who does direct service and has for many years, Olivia is right. There is a disproportionate amount of violence and discrimination
Thank you.
And quite frankly, I shouldn't have taken a white person saying this to get that much applause. So here's my legitimate question, as someone who does direct service. I am seeing a disproportionate amount of people who need a higher level of care that we can provide them in shelter. But our services that provide these are overburdened. These are participants who cannot be employed, who cannot live independently, who need skilled nursing facilities, mental health care, behavioral health care, physical health care. But the people who are helping them get those services, there are some times where I am afraid that someone is going to die on a wait list in my shelter before I can get them housed. Attorneys and nonprofits who help people get disability or help place them into care facilities, or they have wait lists that can be months or years long. And so my question is, what are you going to do to lift the burden from these facilities and also expand services to people who cannot work and cannot live independently, who are unhoused?
Certainly. Andy? You look like you.
I was looking at you, Keith.
Oh, you were.
I think that question's directed right at you, man.
So we have 5,000 people that are living on the street, and every night they stay on their street. They're only getting more difficult, more harmed. You start on the street with addiction. The addiction turns to behavioral health. The behavioral health turns to a medical condition. The first goal is stabilizing that population and making sure we stop the downward spiral for these individuals so we can arrest that situation and then start moving them through the transitional housing. We've got congregate shelters to transitional housing to start using affordable housing to focus on housing first and moving them through the system. There's no magic wand as far as how we're going to address. We have a wait list that in some cases for a Section 8 voucher is 5 years. But we can't ask our brothers and sisters, our fathers and mothers to live on the street and wait while we're waiting for a housing voucher to come available. It's not the secret, but we need to supercharge every part of our community. And what Chris and Andy and Matt and Crystal are doing every day in the work by adding additional capacity is that first step of a very long journey that we're on. There's no magic bullet, but we got to get started with something. So thank you all. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, Dan Steffi, Mayor Beater, Julie Orlando, and Mark, all coming from out of town. Thank you, Crystal and Chris and Andy and Matt. What an extraordinary group of men and women. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. Have a safe ride home tonight.